I tend to think that some of the scariest stories are the ones that are true. How far would your government go in the name of national security in order to learn how to control your mind? In this episode of After Dark, we're talking about the secret CIA project called MKUltra. And what I'm about to tell you isn't fiction. It isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy fact that involved thousands of American citizens, doctors, schools, and military. You know, the idea of mind control is an ancient one. As long as people's been around, there's been others that have wanted to control individuals, have power over them, make them do or say whatever it is that they wanted. And in Nazi Germany, scientists were conducting all types of experiments, sometimes at concentration camps, in order to learn these techniques. They would use shock therapy, drugs, hypnosis, and a lot of these stories we didn't hear about until some of the scientists had to go on trial after the war was over. And then after these revelations, there were actually international laws placed on the books to prevent anything like this from happening again. And the laws stated that you couldn't conduct experiments on people's minds unless you had their consent. You had to have people know that they were volunteering for such an act. But in the mid-1950s, during the Cold War, the United States was convinced that the Soviets and the Chinese were developing mind control techniques, and they were afraid that they were being left behind in the war for the mind. So at first, they followed the law. They started conducting experiments, asking for volunteers, mainly students, who would go and take drugs like LSD and allow people to see how they would react under the influence. And several tests actually proved or yielded positive results. But the CIA knew that in order to actually have this be useful, if they were going to use biological warfare type techniques, they were going to need to use this on people who weren't aware that they were being tested. It's one thing to know that you're going in and being tested and, trying to conduct an experiment. But if you're really going to use this, you want to use it on people who don't know anything about it. And say, for instance, that they captured an enemy spy and wanted to interrogate them or turn them into a double agent, they wouldn't be asking that person to sign a waiver asking if they could be experimented on. So the project went dark. The main project was called MKUltra, but there were actually a lot of other sub-projects under that same banner. So for instance, one project was called Midnight Climax. They had areas set up in places like California and New York, and the CIA had rooms in hotels with one-way mirrors. And they would pay prostitutes to bring men up to the rooms to have sex while the CIA watched and recorded the events on camera. But before they had sex, the prostitutes would lace the men's drinks with LSD, and then they would watch and see how the men reacted and what type of information was divulged. Now, keep in mind that this was all done without the supervision of any doctor or any medical staff. The citizens had no idea they were being targeted or drugged, and they were just targeted at random. And they were targeted at places like this because the CIA wasn't afraid of being caught. They knew that people like this were less likely to speak out if something did happen to them. What are you going to do? Go to the news and claim that the CIA dosed you with LSD and made you have sex with a hooker? So these citizens were targeted at first, but then they started targeting other people. They started targeting people in bars and restaurants, prisons. They even went after hospitals and told them that they'd pay hospital bills if they could conduct experiments on terminally ill cancer patients. That way, if something happened, that person was going to die soon anyway. And again, people would be less likely to believe that these people would have a story to tell. If you're terminally ill, you may be hallucinating anyway. So who's going to believe you? And it wasn't just LSD that was used. They used different things for multiple experiments. Some including hypnosis mixed with drugs or shock therapy. One experiment had a person tied down with 2 IVs, one in each arm. And in one IV was a barbiturate, something that would make you drowsy or sleepy. So whenever the person became sedated and started to fall asleep, they injected the other arm with amphetamines to jolt you awake. And they said oftentimes the patients would start babbling, just random words, but sometimes you could extract useful information. One hospital in Canada was overseen by the country's psychiatric president. Like, this guy was in charge of a ton of other doctors and groups, and he sat on a lot of different boards for American and Canadian. So this wasn't like some no-name guy who barely had his license. He had a hospital where people would come with normal symptoms like depression or anxiety, things you would go see a psychiatrist for. And they would leave the hospital unable to talk or to remember anything. One woman went in at the age of 25. She was married with children and had depression. The doctor told her husband, though, that she was a schizophrenic and needed to be admitted for a 5-week program. And if the husband didn't agree to it, then the doctor threatened that they were going to institutionalize her and keep her in the hospital the rest of her life. So she was admitted to this program. She underwent shock therapy, thousands of times the normal dosage of what you would give a patient. She was injected with LSD. She was sedated for days at a time. By the time she left, she was literally brainwashed. They had wiped her mind clean. And then they would play these recordings in her room over and over to put new ideas and thoughts in her mind. And at the end of the 5 weeks, when her husband came to pick her up, she didn't know who he was. She couldn't read. She didn't even know her own children. This was a project that literally affected thousands of normal, everyday citizens without them knowing. It literally killed some. We don't know how many it killed because a lot of these people walked away, like, for instance, the people who walked out of those hotel rooms with the hookers, and they were never checked on again. So nobody knows what happened to them. People always say if there was a conspiracy, don't you think somebody would talk? But this was a project that was paying countless people like doctors, hospitals, prisons, universities, and so on to carry out these acts. And nobody talked. Most people didn't talk because they didn't realize what was actually going on. It's all hidden under covers and under the guise of something else. And they didn't realize that it was being paid and funded by the CIA. And the CIA funneled it through other means in order to cover its tracks. And the only way that we know anything about this is because during the mid-70s, there was actually a congressional hearing on it. The CIA had actually went through and destroyed almost all records of its existence. But they actually found a couple of boxes that weren't destroyed, that had financial records documenting these events. And that's how we know about it. We don't know what extent it actually happened. We don't know what other programs were being done or carried out. We don't know what other experiments were carried out. So the only way we know this is because they screwed up and didn't destroy everything. The MKUltra program was officially discontinued in the 60s, but there's plenty of evidence that suggests that it carried on into the 70s and 80s under different names and under different groups. So the question is now, did they ever find the best formula to brainwash people? Can they control people under hypnosis and have them carry out acts without them remembering it or having any control over their actions? And are these programs still carried out today under a different name? We don't know. Any Freedom of Information requests since the 80s have been blocked because the government claims the information is classified and it's under national security. Now, you would think national security would mean taking care of the citizens in your own country. But for thousands of people, they were treated like an enemy and were unknowing guinea pigs forced to be subjected to acts that were in clear violation of international laws. So, what do you think? Do you think similar programs are still going on today under a different name than MKUltra? And did you have any idea that a program like this existed in the United States of America, where the government would conduct torture experiments on its citizens in order to learn how to achieve mind control? If you want to see more After Dark episodes, let me know in the comment section below and what topics you'd like to hear about. That does it for me, The Red Dragon. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.